The air was thick with dust and sweat, the sound of chains clinking like metallic heartbeats beneath the auctioneer's shouts. The late summer heat clung to every breath, baking the red clay ground until it cracked. Beneath the wooden platform, rows of bodies waited, each marked, numbered, and reduced to a price. Among them stood Serafina, 18, silent and trembling not from fear but from something colder, deeper resignation. Her wrists were bound loosely with rope, more symbolic than necessary. She wasn't the kind to run. She had learned early that running never led anywhere free. Her dress, once pale linen, was now dulled with travel dust. Beneath the grime, her skin glowed with the warmth of youth, the glow of a life not yet consumed. That glow was what drew the crowd and the whispers. "Still a virgin," one of the handlers muttered to another. "That's what they said." The words carried like sparks in dry grass. Heads turned. Bidders straightened in their seats. The crowd that once murmured now stared. The auctioneer, a red-faced man with hands that waved like a conductor's, caught the shift in the air and smiled. "Lot number 35, he boomed. "Healthy, God-fearing, and unspoiled. Born and bred in Virginia. Who'll start me at $800? Serafina didn't look up. She had learned that eye contact was an invitation to pity, to cruelty, or to claim. So she stared at her bare feet, the dirt pressed between her toes, and waited for her fate to unfold like a song she already knew by heart. The bids rose quickly, 900, 1,000, 1,100. Each voice, each number, erased another piece of her past, until a quiet voice cut through the noise. "I'll offer 1,200. The tone was foreign, smooth, deliberate, touched by an accent that silenced the crowd. Heads turned toward the man in a long grey coat, standing in the back. His face was pale and angular, his eyes a pale blue that seemed carved from winter. His hair, once blonde, was streaked with early grey, and a neat beard framed his mouth with precision. He removed his hat politely as he approached the platform. "Hinrich Müller," he said to the auctioneer, voice soft yet firm. "Clockmaker, from Charleston." The auctioneer hesitated, not from doubt, but from the strange quiet that followed Müller wherever he went. 1,200 to Mr. Müller," he shouted. "Any higher?" No one answered. The hammer came down with a sharp crack. "Sold," the crowd murmured, a widowed outsider buying a young slave girl. Whispers began before Serafina was led off the stage. Some said he wanted a governess for his children. Others hinted darker things, but none spoke to his face. As the sun dipped low, Serafina was brought to a waiting carriage. The driver, a stout older man with kind eyes, helped her inside. Müller sat across from her, his gloved hands folded neatly over a leather-bound journal. The faint ticking of a pocket watch echoed in the quiet. "Do you read?" he asked suddenly, in that calm, accented English. Serafina hesitated, unsure if it was a trap. "A little, sir." He nodded once. "Good. I value education. You'll find my children need a gentle hand and a patient mind." She said nothing. "You will address me as Master Müller," he continued, gaze steady. "You'll tend to my household, guide the children, and behave with modesty. I do not tolerate disobedience, nor do I permit gossip. We will have order." He spoke of order the way a preacher spoke of salvation, with reverence and finality. The carriage rattled over stones, the rhythm of hooves blending with the faint, endless ticking of timepieces hidden in his coat. The sound grew louder in her mind until she could almost hear her own heartbeat sinking to it. By the time the moon rose, they had left the city behind. The road narrowed into forest paths, where shadows hung heavy between the trees. The night insects sang their shrill hymns, and the smell of pine filled the air. When the carriage finally stopped, Serafina saw it a large timber house standing alone among the pines, its windows glowing with yellow lamplight. Dozens of clocks could be seen through the glass, their pendulums swaying in eerie unison. "This," Müller said quietly, stepping down, "is your new home." A small figure peeked from the doorway, a boy of 14, with his father's pale eyes and a guarded expression. Beside him, a girl of 11 clutched a doll and whispered something in German. "Klaus, Greta," Müller called. "Come, this is Sarah." The children approached hesitantly. Klaus nodded politely. Greta hid behind her brother. "Say good evening," Müller instructed, his voice calm but edged with command. "Good evening, miss," Klaus said softly. Serafina managed a faint smile. "Good evening." The front door opened, and a gust of warm air met her face, scented with wood polish, old books, and something metallic beneath it all. Inside, the walls were lined with clocks of every size. Their ticking filled every corner, every pause, every breath. She was led upstairs to a small room beneath the eaves. The bed was neatly made, the sheets cold and white. A single candle flickered beside a brass alarm clock that chimed softly every minute. "Rest," Müller said. "Tomorrow, you begin your duties. I trust you'll prove worth the price." He left her there, his footsteps fading down the hall. Serafina sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the candle's flame. The sound of ticking grew louder, hundreds of clocks below, all keeping time for the same master. And as the flame swayed, she whispered under her breath, not prayer, not hope, but a quiet, defiant thought. "Let time keep his secrets. I will learn them all." Dawn came slow and grey over the Virginia hills. The carriage rocked steadily along the uneven road, wheels creaking under the weight of trunks, clocks, and silence. Serafina sat straight-backed on the opposite seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap the way she had been taught to in the Plantation's chapel. Her wrist still bore faint rope marks from the auction, but she did not hide them. Scars were easier to explain than spirit. Across from her, Master Hinrich Müller read from a small black book. The thin, gold-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose glinted when the morning light cut through the curtain. His lips moved faintly with the rhythm of foreign words, German, perhaps prayers. The steady tick of the silver pocket watch against his vest filled the spaces between breaths. Every so often, he glanced up from the page, not at her face but at her posture, as if measuring obedience by geometry. Outside, the mist rolled over the fields, swallowing trees and fences into white silence. Serafina's reflection in the carriage glass looked ghost-like, eyes wide, expression unreadable. He closed his book. "Do you believe in Providence, Sarah?" he asked. She blinked once. "Providence, sir?" "Yes, that God ordains all things, that we meet who we must, when we must." Her voice was low. "I suppose we all must believe in something, sir." Müller smiled faintly. "A careful answer. You've been trained well." The words weren't praise. They were evaluation, like the way one examines a fine instrument before use. Hours passed before the forest thickened and the road turned narrow. The children, who had been following in a smaller wagon behind, now rode beside the main carriage. Through the window, Serafina saw Klaus, tall for 14, his hands steady on the reins though his eyes betrayed unease. Beside him sat Greta, her hair braided with ribbon, humming to herself as she clutched her porcelain doll. When they reached the ridge, Müller tapped the roof with his cane. The driver slowed. Below them, in the clearing, stood the house. It wasn't grand in the plantation sense, no columns, no verandas, no sprawling quarters, but it had the weight of purpose. The two-story timber structure leaned against the forest's edge like a sentinel, every shutter closed tight, every window reflecting the pale sky. The sound of countless ticking clocks drifted even here, faint but insistent, as if the building itself kept time. When the carriage stopped, Müller stepped out first. "You'll find it peaceful," he said, offering his gloved hand. "I despise noise, disorder, and idleness." Serafina hesitated but placed her hand in his. His palm was cool, almost dry, the touch of a man who worked with delicate mechanisms, not soil or sweat. Inside, the house smelled of oil, wood polish, and faint gunpowder. The foyer walls were lined with clocks, brass, oak, and porcelain, all ticking out of sync yet somehow harmonious. Each carried its own history, its own small heartbeat. A servant in grey livery appeared, an elderly woman with stooped shoulders and cloudy eyes. "Welcome back, sir," she murmured, curtsying. "The rooms are ready." "This is Sarah," Müller said. "She will oversee the household and instruct the children until further notice." The woman nodded silently. "Yes, sir." Serafina followed as Müller guided her through the house. The parlor with its heavy curtains, the dining hall lined with framed sketches of German villages, the study filled with instruments, tiny gears, magnifiers, disassembled clock faces like the remains of metal flowers. He paused before one peculiar piece, a tall grandfather clock whose pendulum had been replaced with a silver chain. "Do you know how time is measured?" he asked suddenly. Serafina glanced at the contraption. "By movement, sir. By the motion that never stops. Precisely, he said, turning to her with a faint smile. Everything alive is a machine. The heart, the lungs, the mind, each can be tuned, improved, or silenced if it runs too loud. He walked on before she could answer. Upstairs, he showed her the nursery, a large room with 2 beds, shelves of books, and a half-finished toy horse on the floor. The air smelled faintly of lavender and ash. Greta will obey your instruction, Müller said. Klaus is less pliant. You will correct that. Yes, sir. You will address me only when spoken to. The children will call you Mutter, Sarah. It will be easier for them. She froze for a moment at the word Mutter, mother. The title struck something deep, almost cruel, inside her. I understand, sir, she replied softly. That evening, as the sun faded behind the pines, the household settled into a strange, mechanical quiet. Greta followed Sarafina everywhere, asking timid questions about her hair, her dress, her accent. Klaus watched from a distance, protective yet distrustful. After dinner, Müller retreated to his study, the door clicking shut behind him. From within came the low hum of grinding gears and the smell of burning oil. Sarafina tucked the children into bed, whispering small stories she half remembered from her mother, tales of stars that never sleep, rivers that forget sorrow. The children listened, eyes wide, as if hearing kindness for the first time in years. When the house fell still, Sarafina lingered by the window. Outside, the forest breathed dark, endless, alive. The moon hung low, its light slicing through branches like silver blades. Then she heard the faintest sound of a clock chime from the hallway, followed by footsteps, slow, measured, coming closer. The doorknob turned slightly, then stopped. Her breath caught, but the steps moved on. Downstairs, a single clock began to strike 12 soft notes echoing through the house. Each tone seemed to vibrate against her ribs. She thought of the carriage, of the auction, of his eyes. At the moment he said Providence. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she whispered into the stillness, not in fear, but as a vow. If he believes every heart can be tuned, then one day I'll decide when his stops. The ticking continued, steady and eternal, as the candle flame danced beside her reflection. Morning light crept through lace curtains, painting soft gold stripes across the nursery floor. Sarafina awoke before dawn, as she always did, the faint hum of clocks guiding her like a metronome. She rose quietly, braided her hair, and tied the white apron Müller had left folded on her chair the night before. The house was silent except for the breathing of the walls, hundreds of tiny heartbeats ticking in polished cases. Her first day as Mutter Sarah began not with orders, but with expectation. The children's breakfast had to be perfect, their lessons orderly, and their manners precise. She moved through the kitchen like memory, smooth, precise, nearly invisible. The cook, a heavy woman named Frau Brendel, glanced up from kneading dough. "He's strict with the little ones," she whispered in a German lilt. "Don't cross him when it comes to their schedule. I've learned to follow rules," Sarafina said softly. Brendel eyed her a moment longer. "Rules are one thing. Control is another. You'll see." By 7 o'clock, the family assembled in the dining hall. Müller sat at the head of the table, his grey coat crisp, his eyes coldly awake. Klaus entered in silence, shoulders tense, while Greta bounced in shy excitement at having a new mother. "Good morning, Master Müller," Sarafina greeted, bowing her head. He nodded without expression. "Begin." Breakfast unfolded with machine-like rhythm, toast passed clockwise, tea poured precisely 2 inches from the rim, knives laid parallel after use. Every gesture felt rehearsed, as if the entire household were caught inside one of his chanchon clocks, every tick accounted for. When Greta accidentally spilled jam on the tablecloth, Müller's jaw tightened. "Greta," he said quietly. The child froze. "Apologize properly." "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered, eyes glistening. "Not to me," he said, his gaze turning to Sarafina. "To Mutter Sarah, she will teach you discipline." Sarafina's pulse quickened. She bent beside the child and dabbed the stain with a cloth. "It's only jam," she said gently. "Nothing that cannot be washed." Müller's gaze sharpened, studying her like a craftsman spotting a flaw in steel. "Kindness," he murmured. A useful illusion if not overused. After breakfast, he retreated to his study, leaving Serafina with the children. Lessons began in the library: arithmetic, reading, and Bible verses written in German script. Klaus recited stiffly, his pronunciation perfect but joyless. Greta stumbled over words until Serafina knelt beside her, tracing the letters with patient hands. "See how Liebe means love?" Serafina said softly. "It sounds softer if you smile while you say it." The girl giggled, the first sound of real childhood Serafina had heard in this house. From the corner, Klaus watched. He wanted to trust her, she could feel it, but something in him had already hardened, shaped by years of quiet fear. When Müller reappeared hours later, the change in the room was immediate. The air thinned. Greta hid her smile. Klaus straightened his back. Serafina rose, smoothing her apron. Müller scanned the chalkboard, then the children. "You've been productive," he said. "Good." His eyes lingered on Serafina longer than politeness allowed. "You have a talent for calm, Sarah. It's disarming." "I try to serve well, sir." He nodded once, then stepped closer. "Do you know why I bought you?" Her breath stalled. "No, sir." He leaned slightly, voice low. "Because I do not believe in chance. You were meant to bring order to this house, perhaps even grace." His eyes flicked toward the children, then back to her. "But remember, grace without obedience is chaos." He turned away before she could answer. That night, while the children slept, Serafina cleaned the parlor. She polished clock faces until her reflection stared back at her from a dozen shining circles. Each one seemed to whisper a warning. The house pulsed with movement, not alive, not dead, something in between. From the study, faint music drifted through the hall. Müller played an old German waltz on his gramophone, the melody warped by scratches on the record. Curiosity drew her to the door. Through a narrow crack, she saw him seated at his desk, writing with slow precision. A framed portrait sat beside him, a young woman, fair-haired, smiling faintly. Anna Müller, the late wife. His fingers traced the glass frame before tightening into a fist. Serafina slipped back, heart hammering. She could still hear his voice from earlier: grace without obedience is chaos. Later, as she prepared for bed, she found a folded note on her pillow in his fine, angular script. "You are to wear white on Sundays. The children respond to purity. No greeting, no signature, just command." She crushed the paper in her fist before setting it aflame with her candle. The edges curled black, the words vanishing one by one. In the nursery, Greta whimpered in her sleep. Serafina sat beside her, brushing the child's hair from her face. Klaus appeared silently in the doorway. "He gets worse when he drinks," he said, voice barely a whisper. Serafina looked up sharply. "You've seen it?" Klaus nodded, eyes glistening in the dark. "He talks to the clocks. Says they listen better than people." A chill passed through her. "Go back to bed," she murmured. "Tomorrow will be better." He hesitated. "It never is." When the boy was gone, Serafina turned to the window. The forest swayed under moonlight, silver and alive. Somewhere within the house, one clock began to strike 12 slow chimes, then silence. She whispered to the dark, "He wears control like a mask, but every mask cracks when time demands it." Her reflection in the glass seemed to nod back, calm, patient, and waiting. And beneath the whisper of gears, she swore she heard something else, the faintest echo of another woman's laughter, long buried but not gone. Dusk draped the manor in its heavy velvet, turning the windows into mirrors. The clocks, one by one, began their nocturnal chorus, slow, deliberate ticks, overlapping like whispered prayers. Serafina moved through the corridors carrying a tray of folded linen. Each footstep echoed faintly, swallowed by the hollow silence of marble floors. The house never truly slept, even when its master did. She paused outside Müller's study door. A line of light leaked through the bottom, faint, golden, unwavering. She could hear the scratch of his pen. For a moment, she thought to knock, to return the folded accounts she had finished earlier. But instinct, that quiet shadow that had saved her before, told her to wait. Instead, she slipped away toward the servants' wing. In the narrow hallway, she found Frau Brendel snuffing out candles, her eyes red-rimmed with fatigue. "He keeps you running late," Serafina whispered. Brendel sighed. "He keeps everyone running late." says sleep breeds weakness. Even for children, Brendel hesitated. Especially for them. Serafina's lips pressed thin. Then he mistakes weakness for peace. The cook gave her a worried glance. Be careful, child. He notices everything. Later that night, as the clocks struck 9, Müller appeared in the doorway of the nursery. His silhouette filled the room, tall, severe, backlit by the golden hall lamp. "How are my pupils?" he asked. Klaus and Greta froze, mid-sentence. The boy straightened instantly, eyes fixed on his book. Greta hid behind her doll. Serafina rose. "They've done their lessons well, sir. Greta's reading has improved." He cut her off with a raised hand. Children improve through correction, not comfort. He walked to the window, gazing out at the shadowed forest. "Do you hear that?" he asked suddenly. Serafina listened. "Only wind. The world outside," he murmured. "It never stops hungering. Only order keeps it from devouring us." He turned back to her, his gaze fixed. "You were purchased to bring order, not affection. Do you understand that, Sarah?" Her pulse fluttered. "I understand discipline, sir." "Good." He stepped closer. The air between them thinned, heavy with unspoken things. "Then tonight, you'll prove it." He gestured toward the hallway. "Follow me." She obeyed. They descended into the east corridor, where portraits of long-dead Müllers lined the walls, men with the same grey eyes, same iron posture. Each face seemed to watch as she passed. At the corridor's end stood a locked door she hadn't seen before. Müller drew a small brass key from his pocket and turned it in the lock. The hinges groaned open, revealing a narrow chamber lit by candlelight. Inside, rows of clocks hung from the walls, every one frozen at midnight. "This is where time stops," he said softly. "My father built it during the war. Said it helped him remember what control felt like." He stepped closer to one of the clocks, brushing dust from its face. "You'll clean them, each one, by hand. When you've finished, I'll inspect your work." Serafina's eyes scanned the room, at least 30 clocks, their brass gleaming faintly in the flickering light. "Tonight, sir?" He smiled faintly. "Obedience doesn't wait until morning." She lowered her gaze. "Yes, Master Müller." Hours passed. Her hands moved with measured rhythm, dusting, polishing, winding each clock, though none were meant to tick. The silence was complete, broken only by her breathing. Behind her, Müller remained seated in a high-backed chair, watching. Not once did he speak. Once, her fingers slipped, and a clock hand bent under the pressure. The tiny metallic ping sounded louder than thunder. She froze. His voice came low. "Perfection tolerates no haste." "I'm sorry, sir." He rose, walked behind her. She could feel his presence close enough to sense his breath. "What drives your obedience, Sarah?" he asked. Her throat tightened. "Survival." He nodded slowly. "A truthful answer. Most people lie and say faith." He reached out, writing the bent hand with precise fingers. "There. Better." Then he whispered, "You see, even time bends for discipline." When he turned away, she exhaled silently. But inside her, something twisted a spark beneath ash. Near midnight, she finished the final clock. Wax had dripped onto her hands, leaving pale burns. She straightened slowly, fatigue biting into her muscles. Müller studied her in silence. Then, unexpectedly, he handed her a glass of water. "Drink," he said. She hesitated. "Obedience," he reminded. She took the glass, sipped. His reflection shimmered faintly in the water's surface, stern, unreadable, almost hollow. When she handed it back, he took it without a word and turned toward the door. "You may rest now," he said. "But remember, the house listens. It always knows who obeys and who resists." Then he left, locking the door behind him. She sat in the candlelight, surrounded by 30 unmoving clocks. The stillness pressed against her chest until she could barely breathe. Then, somewhere behind the wall, a faint tick began. One of the clocks had restarted. She turned the smallest one, brass, engraved with the initials A.M. It pulsed softly, steady, alive. Anna Müller, the late wife. Serafina's eyes widened. The clock's hands began to move backward. Tick, Tick, tick. A cold wind brushed her neck, though no window was open. The candle flame flickered, guttered. She reached out, fingertips trembling, and the clock stopped. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then, faintly, from deep within the house, another sound answered. The distant wail of a child, Greta. Serafina ran for the door, pounding against it, locked. "Master Müller," she called. "Sir." The child, no reply. Only the clocks. All of them, suddenly ticking again in unison, filling the air with a rising mechanical heartbeat. She stepped back, heart hammering, eyes wide with something colder than fear understanding. The clocks didn't just mark time, they owned it. And she, bound in their rhythm, had just taken her first step into his design. Morning came too soon. The house awoke not with sunlight, but with sound, 100 clocks striking 7 in eerie unison. Each chime rolled through the halls like waves of command. Serafina opened her eyes to the sound, her body aching from the night's labor. Candle wax still stained her fingertips, and faint blisters marked her palms. But the clock beside her bed ticked perfectly, as though mocking her exhaustion. She rose and dressed quickly in the plain grey uniform Frau Brendel had left. Downstairs, the smell of black coffee and pine polish filled the air. Klaus sat at the table already, silent, reading from a German text. Greta, pale and glassy-eyed, stared at her bowl of porridge without touching it. "Good morning," Serafina offered softly. Greta didn't respond. Her doll, the one she always clutched, lay untouched beside her, face turned toward the window. Master Müller entered then, precise as always. His coat was buttoned high, boots gleaming. "Punctuality is virtue," he said to no one in particular, yet everyone straightened as if he had shouted it. He poured himself coffee, then looked to Greta. "Eat." The girl lifted her spoon mechanically but stopped halfway. Her lips trembled. "Papa," she whispered, "I heard Mama last night." Klaus's spoon clattered. Serafina froze. Müller's expression didn't change. He simply stirred his coffee, the tiny spoon tapping the porcelain cup in rhythm. "Your mother is at peace, Greta. What you heard was wind through the rafters." "But she called my name," the child insisted, eyes glistening. From the walls, silence fell. Then Müller said softly, "Enough. You will not speak of dreams before breakfast." Greta lowered her head, tears silent. Serafina's chest tightened, the same ache she had felt that night behind the locked door. She could still hear that faint child's cry echoing in her skull. When Müller left for the workshop, Serafina knelt beside Greta and wiped her cheek gently. "What did she say, little one?" Greta's eyes lifted, wide and lost. She said, "Help me stop the clocks." The day passed in a haze of chores. The servants whispered when Müller wasn't near, strange noises in the halls, doors closing themselves, cold air from the cellar. Brendel crossed herself often now. By noon, Serafina had decided to inspect the eastern corridor again, the one where the locked room lay. Every clock there now ticked perfectly, their hands aligned at precise intervals. She knelt beside the brass one with the initials A.M. tracing the engraving. "Anna Müller," she murmured. "What did he do to you?" The pendulum swayed, slow and hypnotic. For a moment, she thought she saw a face reflected in the polished brass, a woman's face, pale and sorrowful, eyes like melted silver. Then the image blinked away. Behind the wall, faintly, came a sound. Not wind, not wood, a sob. Serafina pressed her ear to the plaster. The noise came again, low, muffled, childlike. She stepped back, grabbed a candlestick, and knocked along the surface. Hollow, the wall was double-boarded. Her pulse raced. When Müller's voice suddenly echoed from the stairwell, she nearly dropped the candle. "Sarah!" She spun. He stood at the end of the hall, half in shadow, eyes glinting with cold curiosity. "What are you doing here?" "Dusting, sir." She lied quickly. He walked toward her, boots clicking softly. "The east corridor requires no dusting at this hour." His gaze drifted to the clock behind her, the brass one. "You've taken an interest in my wife's keepsake." Serafina lowered her head. "It's a fine piece, sir." He stopped a few feet away. "She died in that room," he said quietly. "In childbirth. Time stopped the moment her breath did. I keep those clocks silent to remember her. A chill ran through Serafina's blood. He had told her last night they must remain unwound, yet they now ticked flawlessly. "I'm sorry for your loss, sir," she murmured. He studied her face for a long moment, so long she thought he might hear the pounding of her heart. Then, at last, he smiled faintly. "Grief is the clockmaker's curse. We are always trying to make broken things run again." He turned and walked away, his steps fading down the stairs. Only when he vanished did Serafina breathe again. That night, after the household slept, she returned with a small oil lamp. She set it on the floor and pressed her fingers along the wall seams until she found a narrow groove, a hidden latch. It gave a faint click. The panel swung open. A narrow space lay beyond, not quite a room, not quite a passage. Cold air drifted from within. Her lamp flame shivered. She crawled through. Inside, she found a small chamber lined with gears, pulleys, and copper pipes, the inner lungs of the house. Dozens of thin wires ran from the clocks into the wall, converging into a strange wooden box. She opened the lid. Inside lay a lock, of dark hair tied with ribbon, a rosary, and a small silver locket engraved A.M. Serafina's fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a miniature portrait, a young woman with kind eyes, pale skin, and a sorrowful smile. Beneath the painting, a message scratched faintly in German, nahm mir die Zeit. He took time from me. Suddenly, a sharp sound split the silence, the creak of floorboards above. Müller. She doused the lamp and crouched low. His voice carried faintly through the boards. "The clocks will not fail again. They must remember her." Her breath hitched. His footsteps retreated. She waited until silence returned, then crawled out and replaced the panel. Before dawn, Serafina sat at her window, staring into the mist-covered forest. Greta's words replayed in her mind, "Help me stop the clocks." She now understood what the voice behind the wall wanted. Not peace. Not prayer. Release. And as the first light touched the manor roof, Serafina whispered to the ghost within its walls, "You took her time, Master Müller, but soon I will take yours." By morning, the mist clung to the pines like breath on cold glass. The manor stood silent against it, its timbers darkened with dew. Inside, the faint hum of gears and pendulums pulsed through the floors, the living heartbeat of the house. Serafina moved quietly through the kitchen, her eyes still shadowed by the discoveries of the night before. Frau Brendel was already there, kneading dough with trembling hands. "You didn't sleep," Brendel murmured, without looking up. Serafina shook her head. "The clocks kept me awake." The older woman sighed. "They keep us all awake, child. The master says they must never stop, else the dead will not rest." Serafina froze. "He said that?" Brendel nodded slowly, eyes darting toward the hallway as if the walls themselves were listening. "His wife died on the very hour one of those clocks broke. He blames himself, and he swore to bind her soul to their rhythm. Madness, if you ask me, but best not to speak it aloud." Serafina's mind spun. Bound her soul? She excused herself, carrying a tray of tea toward the study. As she reached the door, she heard Klaus's voice from inside, quiet, strained. "Father, Greta keeps saying she hears Mama. Last night, she said the clocks were crying." Müller's tone was calm, but cold. "Your sister dreams too much. I've told her time does not cry. But what if she's right?" The boy pressed. "Sometimes I hear a sudden crash, porcelain shattering." Serafina flinched. Then Müller's voice, low and dangerous. "Do not test me, boy. Faith in disorder breeds weakness. If you hear something, you silence it. Do you understand?" A pause. Then Klaus's quiet, "Yes, sir." Serafina knocked gently and entered. Müller looked up from behind his desk, every inch of him composed again. "Your tea, sir." He gestured toward the table. "Set it there." As she did, her eyes caught the corner of a blueprint pinned to the wall, sketches of intricate clockwork, overlaid with human figures. Nerves, hearts, lungs, all replaced by gears. The title written at the top read, "Mechanica Animae, the Soul Machine." Her breath hitched. "You read Latin?" Müller asked, without looking up. "A little," she said softly. "Then you know it means the machinery of the soul. My wife inspired it, a design to preserve what death tries to steal." He stood, crossing to the diagram. Most men waste their lives fearing mortality. I studied it, measured it. If a heart can be timed, it can be replicated. His fingers brushed the blueprint with almost tender reverence. But time is a jealous god. Serafina forced her voice steady. And your wife, was she part of this design? He turned slowly. She was its beginning, and its failure. Their eyes met. For the first time, she saw something in him, not madness, but conviction carved too deep to unlearn. Go, he said suddenly. See to the children. I have work that cannot be disturbed. She bowed slightly and left, her mind roaring. That night, Klaus came to her room, pale and trembling. Miss Sarah, he whispered. It happened again. What did? Greta sleepwalked. I found her in the east corridor, standing before Mother's clock. She was talking to it. Serafina grabbed her shawl and followed. The corridor was cold, the air thick with the smell of oil and brass. Greta stood barefoot, eyes unfocused, her small hands pressed to the clock face. Stop the hands, Mama, she whispered. Please, stop them. Serafina knelt, shaking her gently. Greta, wake up, sweetheart. The girl blinked, dazed. It's loud, Miss Sarah. She says she can't breathe. Who? Mama. Serafina's heart pounded. Go back to bed, darling. When the children were safe, she returned to the clock and pried open its back panel. Inside, a thin copper tube wound deep into the wall, connected to the same mechanism she had found before. The pipes led downward, into the cellar. She followed them. The cellar was colder than the grave. Shelves lined with half-finished clocks stretched into the dark. At the far end, a heavy iron door waited slightly ajar. She pushed it open and froze. Inside was a machine unlike any she had seen. Part organ, part clock, part heartbeat. Wires ran from it to the ceiling, up through the house. Within its brass frame, she saw a faint, steady pulse of light, like something living trapped within metal. She stepped closer. On a small brass plate, engraved words caught the flicker of her lamp. Anna Müller, bound to the hour eternal. Serafina stumbled back, horror flooding through her. He hadn't just mourned his wife. He had captured her. She turned, to flee, and stopped dead. Müller stood in the doorway, eyes glowing in the lamplight. I warned you not to disturb my work, he said quietly. Her voice trembled. You call this work? You imprisoned her soul. He took a step forward. You see only cruelty because you have never known loss. Love, Sarah, is not mercy. It is possession. He reached for the machine's lever. Would you destroy what I gave my life to preserve? I would free her, she whispered. His hand froze on the lever. Then, slowly, he smiled. Then you will learn what it means to belong to time. He pressed the switch. A sound like thunder filled the cellar, gears grinding, pipes hissing, lights flaring. The machine roared to life, and a wind like breath from the grave swept through the room. Serafina fell to her knees, clutching her ears. Voices, dozens, hundreds, whispered around her, merging into one cry. Stop the clocks. Then, all at once, silence. When she looked up, Müller was gone. The machine stood still again, its faint glow pulsing slowly like a sleeping heart. Serafina stumbled back to her chamber before dawn, her mind blazing with fury and clarity. The truth was carved in brass and blood beneath the house. He had stolen his wife's soul and bound it in the machinery of time. And now she understood her own purpose. The revenge would not be quick. It would not be merciful. It would be timed. Morning broke pale and sickly. Thin mist clung to the orchard beyond the house, wrapping the trees in gauze. The clocks chimed 6, their voices slightly out of rhythm, as if something within their brass throats had begun to tremble. Serafina carried a basket of folded linen through the hallway, her eyes fixed ahead, but her thoughts were still in the cellar. Beneath every ticking clock, she could feel the pulse of that buried machine, beating like a second heart inside the house. At the dining table, Klaus sat rigid, his face drawn, while Greta traced circles in the condensation on her glass. Müller entered last, immaculate as ever, his movements measured to the second. Yet Serafina noticed it, the faint twitch in his right hand, the momentary pause before he lifted his cup. Even his composure was starting to crack. Father, Klaus began, voice low, Greta hasn't slept again. She says Mother talks to her. Miller's spoon stilled mid-stir. "We do not indulge superstition in this house." But she wakes screaming, "Enough!" Greta flinched at the word. Her small voice trembled. "She's cold, Papa. She says the clock's hurt." For a heartbeat, the only sound was ticking hundreds of pendulums answering in perfect, cruel harmony. Müller set his cup down and rose. "Children imagine ghosts when adults feed them fear. I will correct this." He turned toward Serafina. "Bring the girl to my study after lessons." Greta's eyes filled with silent terror. Serafina's breath caught, but she nodded. "Yes, sir." The day crawled forward. Serafina gave the lessons mechanically, letters, arithmetic, but Greta's hand shook so badly she could barely hold the chalk. When Müller's bell rang from downstairs, the sound jolted both children. "Stay here," Serafina whispered to Klaus. "Do not follow." She took Greta by the hand. The child's fingers were ice. Inside the study, sunlight fell through the tall windows, slicing the air into dusty gold. On the desk lay a silver metronome, ticking steadily. Müller stood beside it. "Sit," he said. Greta obeyed. He adjusted the metronome's tempo. "Do you know why clocks tick, Greta?" The girl shook her head. "To remind us that time rules all things, that there is order, even in sorrow." He leaned closer. "Your mother understood that." Greta's lips quivered. "She says you hurt her." The word struck like a bell. Müller froze. His eyes went blank for a moment, then dark. "She says you made her stay," Greta whispered. "She wants to go." He straightened slowly. "Sarah," he said without turning, "take the child to her room." Serafina stood still. Every instinct screamed, "Don't move." "Now," he said, sharper. She guided Greta out, closing the door behind them. The instant the latch clicked, the metronome inside stopped. That night, a storm rolled in from the coast. Rain lashed the windows. Thunder shook the rafters. Serafina sat awake, listening. Sometime past midnight, footsteps creaked in the hallway, small ones. She opened her door. Greta stood there, clutching her doll, eyes wide and glassy. "Miss Sarah," she whispered, "Mama says it's time." The girl turned and walked away before Serafina could answer. "Greta," she hissed, grabbing a lamp and following. The child moved with dreamlike calm, down the stairs, through the parlor, toward the east corridor. Each flash of lightning showed her pale nightdress floating like a ghost ahead of the light. "Greta, stop." But the girl didn't stop until she reached the brass clock with the initials A.M. She laid her hand on it. The ticking around them quickened, every clock in the hall joining the rhythm. Then crack. The glass face split from inside. Greta gasped and stumbled backward. A gush of cold air burst from the crack, carrying a whisper that made Serafina's skin crawl. "Free me." The candle flame bent sideways. The pendulums began to swing wildly, as if invisible hands shoved them. Greta screamed. Serafina grabbed her, dragging her away as the clocks erupted, some shattering, some freezing mid-tick. When they reached the stairwell, Müller was already there, lamp in hand, his face lit with fury and disbelief. "What have you done?" She touched nothing. Serafina shouted over the wind that now seemed to come from the walls themselves. "It's her. Your wife she's trying to break. Free! You think I haven't heard her?" he roared. "She calls because she's incomplete." He stormed past them toward the corridor, coat whipping. "Stay with the children." But Serafina followed. She couldn't stop. In the broken hall, Müller knelt before the brass clock, pressing both hands to it. "Anna," he whispered, "you belong to me. You always did." The air hummed, the sound swelling into a low, vibrating moan. Serafina's lamp flickered. Every clock hand in the corridor began spinning backward. She screamed, "You can't bind the dead forever." He turned on her, face wild. "Then let the living replace them." He lunged toward her. She swung the lamp, glass shattered, flames spilling across the floorboards. Fire crawled beneath the portraits, devouring the varnish. Müller staggered back, shouting something in German she couldn't catch. The house answered with a deep groan. Greta's voice rang out from behind. "Papa, stop!" Just as a section of ceiling cracked and fell between them, smoke thickened. Flames found the oil-soaked wood of the clocks, setting them alight one by one. Serafina pulled Greta into her arms. Through the smoke, She saw Müller at the end of the corridor, silhouetted by the burning brass. He reached for the clock again, desperate. The pendulum snapped free, striking him across the face. He fell backward, disappearing into the smoke. Then came a sound like all the clocks, sighing at once, metal collapsing, time releasing its breath. Serafina half-carried, half-dragged Greta toward the stairs. Klaus met them midway, coughing. Together they burst into the rain-soaked yard as the upper windows exploded outward, sending shards of glowing glass into the dark. Behind them, the manor burned a cathedral of fire and screaming gears, and amid the roar, a single, peaceful tone rang out one final chime, pure and steady. Then silence. They stood shivering in the mud until dawn painted the smoke grey. Klaus held Greta close. Serafina's dress clung heavy with rain. In the distance, the clock's last embers faded. Greta looked up at her. "She's gone now," the child whispered. "Mama says thank you." Serafina brushed a strand of wet hair from the girl's forehead. "Rest easy, little one. Time belongs to no man now." Thunder rolled one last time, like applause from the heavens. The house that had once ticked for a tyrant stood silent at last. Dawn crept slow and mournful over the ruins. Smoke drifted like torn silk through the skeletal remains of the Müller estate. Charred timbers jutted upward, black against the pallid sky. A single chimney still stood crooked, stubborn, and silent. Serafina stood at the edge of the debris, her shawl pulled tight against the cold. Greta clung to her skirts, while Klaus knelt beside what had once been the study, turning over fragments of brass and glass that glinted faintly in the ash. "Don't touch anything sharp," she warned softly. He nodded but didn't look up. His eyes had changed overnight, older now, the naivete burned away by firelight and screams. They had watched the house die together. Every tick and chime that had once ruled their days had melted into silence. Yet the silence itself felt alive, watchful, heavy with something unfinished. From the smoke rose a faint metallic glimmer. Serafina crouched and brushed soot aside. Beneath it lay the remains of an hourglass, its top cracked, the sand fused into glassy clumps. She lifted it gently. The etched initials on the rim A.M. still shimmered faintly through the grime. "Anna Müller," she whispered. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of damp ashes and iron. Somewhere in the ruins, a clock spring snapped with a faint ping, like a dying nerve. Greta tugged her hand. "Miss Sarah, are we going to stay here?" Serafina looked at the child, eyes ringed red, hair tangled with soot. Behind her, Klaus watched silently, the ghost of his father's posture still shadowing his stance. "No," Serafina said finally. "Not here. The dead deserve their rest and we deserve ours." They buried Müller's remains beneath what was left of the old oak, behind the house. There wasn't much left to bury, just scorched fragments of clothing and the heavy iron watch he had always worn. It had stopped at 2:14 a.m., the exact moment the house collapsed. Klaus lowered the watch into the earth, his face unreadable. Greta held a single white flower, one of the few that had survived the fire in the garden, and placed it atop the soil. Serafina murmured a quiet prayer. Not for his soul, she couldn't bring herself to do that, but for the children's freedom from his shadow. When it was done, the three stood together, silent. The air was cool, washed clean by the rain. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled for morning mass. "Where will we go?" Klaus asked. Serafina looked toward the horizon where the land curved into fog. "West. There's a town by the river. Maybe work, maybe peace." Greta's small voice trembled. "Will Mama find us there?" Serafina knelt, taking her hands. "No, sweetheart. She's gone where the clocks can't follow." The girl seemed to consider that, then nodded solemnly. They left by midday. The road was soft with mud, bordered by skeletal trees stripped bare by the storm. Behind them, smoke from the manor still drifted upward, thin and pale, as if time itself were exhaling. For the first few miles, no one spoke. The rhythmic crunch of their boots replaced the sound of ticking clocks. The silence, once dreadful, now felt like relief. As dusk approached, they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Below lay the river, its waters bronze in the dying light. Serafina paused, taking the hourglass from her satchel. Its glass was cracked, but a few grains of sand remained loose. When she turned it, the sand trickled slowly through, soft as a sigh. Time still moves, she murmured, even after all that. Klaus glanced at her. What will we do with it? She looked toward the river. Give it back. They descended to the water's edge. The air smelled of wet stone and reeds. Greta knelt beside her, watching as Serafina placed the broken hourglass into the current. It sank slowly, twisting once before vanishing beneath the ripples. A moment later, the wind stirred the faintest sound of a woman's laughter drifting through the reeds. Greta smiled faintly. She's happy now. Serafina nodded. Yes, she is. Night found them sheltering in an abandoned mill house by the river. The children slept beside the hearth, wrapped in blankets Serafina had salvaged from the ruins. She sat awake, staring into the embers, her mind replaying the last words Müller had spoken, then let the living replace them. There had been madness in his eyes, yes, but also fear. A man consumed by his need to command even death itself. She wondered how long he had been haunted by what he'd done, how long Anna's voice had whispered from the walls. Outside, the river whispered its endless song. Serafina rose, stepping into the cold night air. Above her, stars glimmered through tatters of cloud. For the first time in years, she could look at them without feeling watched. In her pocket, she found a small key, the one Müller had once worn around his neck. It was bent and blackened now, useless. She threw it into the river. It vanished with barely a splash. Behind her, Greta stirred in her sleep. "Mama," she murmured softly. The clocks stopped. Serafina smiled faintly. "Yes, darling." They did. By morning, sunlight warmed the stones of the mill house. The children woke to the smell of river bread frying on a makeshift pan. Serafina had found flour in a half-burned sack nearby and fish in the stream. It wasn't much, but it was life. Klaus ate quietly, then said, "You could have left us. No one would have blamed you." She looked at him steadily. "Someone once said I was born to serve. Maybe that's true, but now I choose whom I serve and how." He nodded, understanding more than his years should allow. As they packed to leave, Greta ran outside and pointed toward the trees. "Look." A clock face hung there, one of the old brass dials, caught on a branch. Its hands had melted together, forming a perfect circle, a symbol with no beginning and no end. Serafina stared at it for a long time. "Let it stay," she said finally. "Let it remind whoever passes that time can burn too." They turned west once more. The wind was behind them now, carrying no whispers, only the sound of open road and distant bells. As the day warmed, Serafina looked back one last time. Smoke no longer rose from the ruins. The valley lay still, washed clean, reborn. "Goodbye, master," she whispered. "Your hourglass is empty." Then she took the children's hands, and together they walked into the sunlight, three shadows stretching long, then fading into the brightness of a day that finally belonged to them. 3 days along the western road brought them to the town of Glen Haven, a quiet settlement nestled beside the wide brown river. Its streets were cobbled but cracked, and the smell of tanneries drifted faintly in the morning air. Wagons rumbled past with barrels of flour and hides. Traders called out in accents from every corner of the state. To Serafina, it felt almost unreal, too alive, too unmeasured after the rhythm of ticking clocks that had ruled her world. She held Greta's hand tight and kept Klaus close. They passed the small church square, where a preacher's voice rose over the sound of carts. "The Lord tests every soul by fire. What's lost in flame is purified." Greta flinched at the word fire. Serafina gently steered her away. Down a side street, they found an inn, the Oxford Arms, a modest place with weathered shutters and a sign that creaked with every gust. A woman with grey hair and a kindly face stood at the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Travelers?" she asked, her eyes taking in their soot-stained clothes and weary faces. "Yes, ma'am," Serafina replied. "We've come a long way. We seek work and a place to rest for a few days." The woman's gaze softened. "You'll find both here if you don't mind honest labor. Name's Mrs. Thorne. You can call me Ada." She ushered them inside. The warmth of the hearth was immediate and kind. For the first time in weeks, Serafina felt her shoulders lower, her guard eased just a fraction. That night, after supper of stew and bread, Serafina sat near the fire, mending torn sleeves while the children dozed by the hearth. Ada watched her work from behind the counter. "You sew well," she said. I've had practice, Serafina replied, eyes on her stitches. Lost your home to the storm? Serafina hesitated. Something like that. Ada nodded, not pressing. There's always someone needing a steady hand here. Laundry, cooking, mending. If you'll stay, I'll pay fair wages. It was more kindness than she'd expected from a stranger. That would mean the world to us, she said quietly. Ada smiled. You look like a woman who's seen the worst. Folk like that usually know how to start again. Serafina didn't answer. The fire cracked softly. In its glow, Greta's small hand rested against Klaus's arm. Both children slept without fear. It felt like a miracle. Morning came bright and clear. Serafina rose early, scrubbing the inn's floors and polishing the pewter cups until they shone. By midday, Ada introduced her to a man who had come seeking help with his household. He stood tall and broad-shouldered, his face partly shadowed beneath a worn hat. His voice was rough, with a coastal drawl. This, her? He asked. Yes, Ada said. Name's Sarah. Hard-working and quiet. She's got 2 little ones she minds. The man nodded. Name's Jonas Whitfield. I keep a farm out by Mill Creek. My housekeeper passed in spring, and I can't keep up alone. If she's willing, I'll pay room and board. Serafina studied him, his clothes patched but clean, his eyes the grey of river stone. There was no cruelty in his stance, only weariness. Where is Mill Creek? She asked. 6 miles east, close to the forest line. Plenty of room. Quiet. Quiet. The word held promise and danger both. She thought of the flames, the clocks, the endless ticking that had once filled her dreams. Perhaps quiet was what they all needed. She nodded. We'll come. By dusk, Jonas's wagon rattled along the dirt road leading from Glen Haven. Greta sat beside Serafina, watching fields of golden hay roll past. Klaus rode in back, holding their small bundle of belongings. The air smelled of pine and earth. Overhead, crows traced black arcs across the reddening sky. Jonas spoke little. When he did, it was of work fences to mend, soil to till before frost. But his silence was not harsh. It was a man's silence, born of solitude, not cruelty. As they neared the farm, Serafina saw a wooden house set against a backdrop of hills. Smoke rose from its chimney, and 2 children played near a watering trough. Jonas's own, she assumed, a boy of about 10 and a girl perhaps 7. When they saw the wagon, they ran forward, waving. Jonas's voice softened. That's Henry and Ruth. Greta perked up beside Serafina, her earlier shyness easing. They have a swing, Jonas smiled faintly. Aye. My wife made it before she passed. The words hung briefly in the air, simple, unguarded sorrow. Serafina met his gaze, and for the first time since the fire, she saw in another human being a reflection of her own brokenness. That evening, after settling children, Jonas showed her the kitchen, the well, the tool shed. Everything was plain but orderly. The house smelled of oak and old smoke. I can't pay much till harvest, he said, but you and the little ones will eat and sleep safe. That's a promise. Serafina inclined her head. Safety is payment enough. He paused, as if weighing her words. Not many folks say that and mean it. I've learned what it costs to have peace, she answered quietly. Later that night, when all had gone still, Serafina stepped outside. The moon was a pale coin above the fields, the crickets loud in the grass. She held the edge of her shawl and closed her eyes. The air was cool and full of life. No gears turning, no invisible eyes watching from the dark. She thought of Muller's words, then let the living replace them. Perhaps, in some twisted way, he had meant that life goes on, that the living inherit the burdens of the dead, and the only choice is whether to bear them or break them. A floorboard creaked behind her. Jonas stood at the doorway, holding a lantern. Can't sleep? She shook her head. It's strange. Silence used to frighten me. Now it feels earned. He nodded slowly. Silence ain't the absence of sound, Miss Sarah. It's the world catching its breath. Their eyes met briefly in the golden lantern like 2 survivors of different storms. Serafina turned back to the moonlit fields. Somewhere, deep inside, something loosened. Something that had been wound too tight for far too long. Inside, Greta stirred in her bedroll. Miss Sarah, she murmured in her sleep. The clocks are quiet again. Serafina smiled faintly, brushing the child's hair. Let them rest, sweetheart. The world has enough noise without them. She blew out the lantern. Darkness wrapped the house in peace. For the first time, it didn't feel like the kind that hides horrors. It felt like the kind that heals. Autumn came, slowly to Mill Creek. The fields browned, the air turned sharp, and the evenings stretched longer, filled with the smell of burning leaves and damp soil. Serafina settled into the rhythm of the farm, rising before dawn, lighting the stove, mending, cooking, and keeping the 4 children fed and clothed. It was honest work, and for a time, peace seemed possible. Yet some nights, when the wind curled around the house and the rafters creaked, she swore she heard faint ticking. Not from clocks Jonas owned none, but from somewhere beneath the floorboards. She told herself it was nothing. Old wood, mice. The echo of her own past refusing to fade. But Greta began to hear it too. "Miss Sarah," the girl whispered one night from her cot, the floors whispering again. Serafina froze, the thread in her needle trembling. The fire was low, the only light a faint orange glow against the walls. She listened. At first, there was only silence, then soft, rhythmic taps, almost like breath caught in a pattern. She stood and pressed her ear to the plank floor. The sound was faint, but distinct. Tick, tick, tick. Her stomach tightened. Jonas found her like that minutes later, crouched by the hearth. "Something wrong?" he asked. "I thought I heard." She stopped herself, forcing a smile. "Mice, maybe." He frowned. "Been meaning to patch the crawl space. I'll look tomorrow." But she knew it wasn't mice. It was too measured, too deliberate. The next day, as Jonas worked the fields, Serafina pried up one of the loose boards near the hearth. Beneath lay compacted dirt, dry and undisturbed. Nothing moved, nothing gleamed. She replaced the plank, feeling foolish. But that night, the sound came again, louder. Tick, tick, tick. Greta stirred. "She's calling again," the girl murmured in her sleep. Serafina's heart stopped. "Who, child?" "Miss Anna," Greta whispered. "She says the hourglass is broken." The words crawled through Serafina's blood like cold fire. She rose, lit a lamp, and checked the floor again. The ticking stopped the moment her fingers touched the wood, as if it knew she was listening. Days passed. The harvest came in, and the work left her no time to think. But at night, the whispers returned. Sometimes they came with the faint scent of smoke and brass, the memory of the burned manor. Once, she found the shape of a small handprint in the soot near the hearth, too small to be any of the children's. Jonas noticed her sleeplessness. "You look pale," he said one morning. "You sickening?" "No, sir," she said softly. "Just the cold." He studied her for a long moment. "I know that look. You're running from ghosts, aren't you?" She looked away. "I buried them, then stopped digging them up," he said simply. That night, the wind rose, rattling the shutters. Rain slashed the roof. Jonas had gone to the barn to secure the animals, and the children were huddled near the fire, frightened by the storm. "Tell us a story," little Ruth begged. "Something to make the thunder stop." Serafina smiled faintly, though her nerves thrummed. "Once there was a clockmaker," she began, "who thought he could trap time inside a bell." As she spoke, lightning flashed white and sharp, and for an instant, she saw something reflected in the glass of the window behind the children. A woman's shape, tall, pale, hair hanging loose like wet threads, watching. The lamp flickered. The fire hissed and nearly went out. Then came the whisper, faint but clear from the floor itself. "You can't bury time." The voice was Anna Müller's. The children screamed. The boards beneath them shuddered as though something were crawling underneath, searching for release. Serafina grabbed Greta and Ruth, pulling them back. Klaus held Henry, wide-eyed. The floor buckled once, dust rising from the cracks. Then the sound stopped. Silence fell heavy as stone. Jonas burst through the door moments later, soaked to the bone. "What in God's name?" "The floor," Serafina gasped. "There's something under." She stopped. The floor was still now, perfectly still. Only the rain spoke. Jonas examined the boards, shaking his head. "This house is old. Wind gets in everywhere. You're letting shadows talk to you. But when he touched the boards, his hand jerked back, burned. A faint red welt bloomed on his palm, shaped like the edge of a clock hand. They looked at each other in horror. He said nothing the rest of the night. The next morning, he tore up half the floor, searching for rot, for pipes, for anything that made sense. There was nothing, only dirt, cold, and silent. When he replaced the planks, he said quietly, "We'll keep the children in the barn tonight." Sarafina nodded, but deep inside, she knew what the voice wanted. The hourglass had been thrown into the river, but something of it had followed its curse, perhaps, or its unfinished time. That night, when the storm returned, she lay awake on the barn floor beside the sleeping children, listening. The wind moaned through the rafters, the horses stirred restlessly, and then came the faintest echo, distant but unmistakable. Tick, tick, tick. Only this time, it was coming from the direction of the house. Sarafina sat up, heart hammering. She stared at the farmhouse through the cracks in the barn wall. A light had appeared in the window, dim, yellow, swaying as though carried by an unseen hand. Jonas was asleep beside the door. She shook him awake. "The house," she whispered. "Look." He turned, saw the light and froze. The lamp was moving through the rooms, from window to window, floor to floor. But no one was inside. "I locked every door," he muttered. The lamp stopped at the upstairs window. Then it went out. Thunder rolled across the valley, shaking the barn. Sarafina clutched Greta close, her breath shallow. Jonas whispered, almost to himself, "Maybe you were right. Maybe some ghosts don't burn." By dawn, the house stood silent again. No sign of the light, no ticking. But in the soft dirt outside the porch, Sarafina found footprints, bare, delicate, leading from the door toward the river. And beside them, embedded in the mud, lay a small fragment of glass curved like the edge of an hourglass. She picked it up. It was warm, and faintly, impossibly, she heard it. Tick. The night had been a silent witness to everything: pain, love, betrayal, and rebirth. But dawn was not gentle. It came crawling through the thin mist, spilling pale light across the estate grounds, revealing the smoke that still curled from the burned stables. The scent of ashes and blood still lingered heavy, iron-laced, unforgettable. Evelyn stood on the veranda in a tattered white gown, her hands bruised, her hair undone. The once naive girl had vanished. In her place stood a woman forged in the furnace of her own suffering. Her eyes, swollen from sleeplessness, carried no tears anymore, only resolve. Every drop of innocence had been burned away with the past. Isaac, the widower, stood by the barn, his face half hidden in shadow. The morning light caught the edge of the revolver he held at his side. Around him, the whispers of the house staff broke like a distant storm: fear, pity, confusion. No one dared approach, no one dared speak, for all of them knew something sacred or sinful was about to end. "Evelyn," Isaac said at last, his voice carrying across the stillness, "you think vengeance frees you?" She didn't flinch. "Vengeance doesn't free. It ends." Her tone was flat, empty. "And this ends today." He stepped closer, boots scraping over gravel. The wind caught his coat, snapping it like a dark wing. His children were inside, still asleep, unaware of the fire that had nearly consumed everything. The master of the house, widowed, haunted, looked at the girl he had bought, broken and perhaps loved, and in her face he saw his judgment. "I gave you a life when no one else would," he said. "You gave me a prison," she replied, "and then you dared to call it mercy." Isaac's fingers tightened on the revolver. "You've changed," he murmured, almost to himself. "You used to look at me like I was salvation." Evelyn stepped down from the veranda, barefoot in the cold morning dew. "You mistook my silence for faith. It was only waiting." He aimed the gun at her, but his hands trembled. For all his cruelty, all his pride, he could not steady himself before her gaze. The same eyes that once pleaded for kindness now stripped him bare of excuses. Around them, the world held its breath. A single shot cracked through the dawn. The birds fled the trees in an explosion of wings. Isaac stumbled backward, dropping the revolver. Blood bloomed across his chest, soaking through his shirt. He looked stunned, betrayed by the inevitability he had invited upon himself. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't speak. The gun smoked faintly in her hand. He fell to his knees, gasping, eyes wide and glistening. "Eve," he rasped, his voice dissolving into the dirt. I loved." But the words never finished. His body hit the ground with a dull thud. Evelyn lowered the gun, her breathing steady. The air felt strange, lighter, almost unreal. She looked down at him. Then toward the rising Sunday. The light washed over her face, catching the faint tear trail on her cheek. It wasn't sorrow. It was release. Sarah, the old cook, appeared in the doorway, covering her mouth in horror. "Child, what have you done?" Evelyn turned, her expression unreadable. "What needed doing?" she whispered. "He took everything. I took it back." For a long moment, no one moved. Then she walked past Sarah, through the open door, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The children stirred in the next room, unaware of the death outside. She paused at their doorway, watching them sleep, soft faces untouched by sin. She would not stain them with her truth. As the sun climbed higher, Evelyn walked toward the stables, toward the horizon beyond the fields. The gun hung at her side, her steps slow but certain. Behind her, the plantation stood in eerie silence, its legacy of power and cruelty bleeding into the soil. She didn't look back. The world she left behind would whisper her name for generations, some with fear, some with awe, some with understanding. But for Evelyn, there would be no return, no forgiveness, no redemption. Only the quiet knowledge that at last she was no longer owned. The road was long, winding through the misty edges of the land she had once tilled under command. The early sun painted the fog gold, and each step carried the weight of both sin and survival. Evelyn walked barefoot, the cold earth biting into her soles, but she did not slow. Her thin gown fluttered like a ghost's veil in the morning wind. Behind her, the house she'd once been chained to was shrinking, its tall white columns fading into the haze. It looked peaceful now, as if nothing had happened, but in those quiet walls, a corpse cooled, and a story ended. Every breath she took seemed strange. Freedom, she realized, wasn't a loud thing. It wasn't the roar of rebellion or the cry of triumph. It was silence, the kind that sank deep into the bones, filling the empty spaces left behind by years of pain. At the fence line, where the property met the wild grass, she paused. The horizon stretched endlessly ahead, golden fields merging into a vast blue sky. She could go anywhere now. But where does one go when the past still walks beside them? A distant sound broke the quiet. Hooves. Evelyn turned. A horse approached slowly. Sarah the cook rode it, clutching a bundle wrapped in cloth. Her eyes were red from crying. She stopped beside Evelyn and dismounted with effort. "You can't stay," Sarah said softly. "They'll come looking when they find him." "I know." Sarah unwrapped the bundle, a loaf of bread, a canteen of water, a shawl. "You'll need these," she said. Her hands trembled as she pressed them into Evelyn's arms. "Child, where will you go?" Evelyn looked at the distant trees. "Where no one calls me child anymore." Sarah's face broke. She reached out and gripped Evelyn's hand. "You did what he made you do," she said in a hoarse whisper. "Don't let the devil tell you otherwise." "I don't fear the devil," Evelyn replied quietly. "I've seen him die." The two women stood in silence, the morning wind whispering through the grass. Then Evelyn pulled the shawl around her shoulders and stepped through the gate. Sarah watched her go until she was no more than a blur swallowed by light. Far beyond, the road led to a small river town where no one knew her name. She would work, perhaps, or vanish into the rhythm of life like countless others before her. She would never speak of what happened on that estate, the fire, the shot, the master's final breath. But sometimes, when she caught her reflection in still water, she would see not the broken girl who had been sold, but the woman who had dared to end her story on her own terms. By noon, she had reached the river. The water shimmered, cool and deep. She washed her hands in it, watching the blood and ash swirl away, then disappear. A dragonfly hovered near her face, small, fragile, alive. She smiled faintly. Behind her, the horizon smoked faintly. The estate was burning again. Someone had set it aflame, maybe the workers, maybe fate itself. The fire rose like a judgment, curling into the sky, carrying with it the last of her chains. Evelyn did not look back. She tightened the shawl and stepped into the shallows, letting the water swallow her reflection. One last time. When she reached the far bank, the fire was only a shimmer of orange in the distance. A stranger's cart rattled down the road, a merchant heading north. Evelyn waved him down. "You travellin' far, miss?" the man asked, tipping his hat. "As far as this road goes," she said. He nodded, helping her onto the cart. The wheels turned, and the road stretched ahead, endless, unknown, waiting. The air was warm now. The scent of freedom, raw, uncertain, and real, filled her lungs. For the first time in her life, Evelyn closed her eyes, and the silence didn't hurt. And though history would forget her name, the land never would. The soil would remember the girl who was sold as a virgin, used as property, and who rose in the end not as a runaway, but as her master's reckoning. The wind whispered her name through the trees. Evelyn, the girl who walked beyond the fields.